To then bring you back to that roll call on the date in question, did you receive a telephone call around roll call time?
I believe the phone call was shortly, just as roll call concluded, yes.
And who was that phone call from?
I received a phone call from Sergeant Pluger, who was the mid-watch sergeant.
Do you recall what Sergeant Pluger, let me back up. Did Sergeant Pluger give you information that you relied upon to take further steps in your duties that night?
Yes.
Okay. What did Sergeant Pluger tell you?
Sergeant Pluger informed me that he was at the hospital at that time, and he was with a male that he described may or may not live. Later on in the night, I found out that that male was Mr. Floyd. He said he was down there at the hospital. He asked me if I would be willing to respond to the incident location of 38th in Chicago because he was tied up at the hospital at the time. He asked me if I would respond down there just to make sure, just in case we had to secure that area and make contact with any of his officers that were there on scene still, because this had the potential to be a possible critical incident.
Can you describe then what you mean by critical incident?
Usually an incident, an officer-involved incident where either the officer or somebody else has died, or an officer or somebody else has suffered great bodily harm that later led to death.
And based on your knowledge of Minneapolis Police Department policy, what is supposed to happen if there is a critical incident with the crime scene and with the participants?
A crime scene is supposed to be secured, which means locked down, and that is for the purpose to preserve any evidence that is there. The involved parties or the involved officers usually are chilling and awaiting escort sergeants so that they can be escorted to an interview room downtown. Appropriate notifications are made. IA, homicide, if you will, the upper administration. The area is canvassed, which just means there's a designated amount of officers that are searching the area looking for any witnesses that can give a synopsis of what they saw. And then we wait for the investigators to get there, car 21, and pretty much wait for further information from some of the superiors.
Do you take any steps with respect to body-worn cameras and ensuring that those are activated?
Absolutely.
What do you do?
And ensure that everybody's body-worn cameras are active and running at all times.
And in this specific case, did you take steps consistent with the procedures you just outlined?
Yes, when I arrived on scene, yes.
At this time, I'd like to publish Exhibit 1. After you got off the phone with Sergeant Pluger, did you go directly to 38th in Chicago?
I told Sergeant Pluger that I didn't mind going down there. I just had to gather some of my things and then I'd head down there. So I believe I got down there to 38th in Chicago at about 9:35 p.m. is when I arrived there.
Were you wearing your body-worn camera?
Yes.
And it was activated?
Yes.
Can you please describe the scene as you recall it when you arrived?
38th in Chicago, so it's kind of a high-profile area. 38th Street and Chicago Avenue are both major thoroughfares in South Minneapolis. When I arrived, The only people that were there were Officers King and Lane, it seemed. There wasn't very many other people around when I arrived there.
Now, you indicated that your body-worn camera was activated, and prior to testifying today, you've had an opportunity to review various still photographs taken from the footage of your body-worn camera. Is that right?
Yes.
And at this time, Your Honor, I'm going to offer Exhibits 81 through 95, which are images taken from Sergeant Edwards' body-worn camera.
Any objection? 81 through 95 inclusive are received.
You indicated that Officers King and Lane were at the scene when you arrived.
I did.
Publish Exhibit 81. Do you recognize the individuals in this photograph, Exhibit 81?
I do.
And who is this individual?
It's Officer Lane.
And this?
It's Officer King.
Can you tell the jury what, if any, interaction you had with Officers Lane and King when you arrived?
When I arrived there, I was met by Officer King first. First thing I did was I told him, hey, if your body-worn camera is not on, turn it on now. He did. Officer Lane came out of the car several seconds afterwards, told the same thing to him, and he activated his body-worn camera.
All right, so Lane was initially sitting in the car.
Yes, sir.
Do you know what car?
His squad car, the one that's pictured right there.
Is that 320?
Sure.
Is that a squad car assigned to that sector within the 3rd Precinct?
Yeah, that's a middle watch squad.
After you instructed both officers to activate or make sure their body-worn camera was activated, did you tell them anything else they needed to do?
Yes, I asked them where they had interaction with Mr. Floyd. They told me that they interacted with him on the sidewalk there by their squad car. They also told me they interacted with him on Chicago Avenue, right in front of the Cup Foods store.
And based on those statements, then, did you direct them to place crime scene tape around the area to preserve the scene?
Yes. So with that information, I was able to gather where the incident occurred, and then I instructed them to place crime scene tape around the area so that we could preserve any potential evidence that was there.
First, I'm going to ask to publish Exhibit 82. All right, what do you see in this photograph?
That appears to be Officer King putting up crime scene tape.
And publish Exhibit 1. Do you have one of these up there, little stylus?
Yeah.
If you could use that to just roughly outline the area that will show where the crime scene tape was put up generally.
Okay, so generally, their squad was right here at the time. This is different. Their squad was here. Mr. Floyd's vehicle was right here. I had them encompass this whole area. So crime scene tape was around that whole intersection. It encompassed the entire intersection.
At the time you were having them do this, were there any other officers in the area at the time, or was it just King and Lane?
At that time, I believe it was myself, King, and Lane, but I had other officers from my shift responding to the area because I knew we were going to probably have to lock down that area.
So you asked the other officers to
Yes.
arrive? That wasn't something that was arranged before?
No,
And the purpose
I
of-
asked for additional officers.
Let's try not to talk over each other.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem. No problem.
All right. And that was for the specific purpose of keeping the area secure?
Yes, sir.
If you would clear that, Your Honor. And at some point, did you learn that this in fact was a critical incident?
Later on in the night, yes.
But you were taking steps to secure the scene as if it were going to be a critical incident before that?
Yes, sir.
So at this point, did you really know anything about what had happened that caused you to be called out there specifically?
No, I didn't know specifics. No, at that point, I had very little specifics.
For
I
example,
was waiting for more phone calls from Sergeant Kluger for more direction of what was going on.
for example, you didn't know the defendant was involved at that point. Is that right?
Correct.
You had a brief interaction and conversation with King and Lane. Is that right?
Yes.
Based then on what they told you, you took some additional steps. Were you able to then communicate with the other officers that you had directed to come to the scene to provide them direction?
Yes.
What did you ask the other officers to do?
A number of the officers I asked to canvass the area. As I explained before, that just means pretty much go door to door, see if there's any potential witnesses that may have been there when the incident occurred, and obtain a synopsis of what they saw, and to get their name and information. It's just searching for any potential witnesses and getting their story.
If we could publish Exhibit 83, another image from your body-worn camera, you see some of the other officers from your shift who you called to help you with the scene.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask you to just identify some of the folks in the picture. We'll start, of course, here. Who's that?
It's Officer Lane,
Right. And this individual?
Officer Nerling,
Okay. And this person?
it's Officer Cape,
This person?
Officer Oaks,
And this person?
and Officer Areola.
And Officer Areola was a fairly new officer at the time?
Yes, sir.
Now, would you please tell the jury just sort of the scope of the security you provided to this scene at that time during these it was the early morning hours now of May 26th, is that right?
Yes, sir.
What did you do?
I shortly thereafter here, I received a call from Kluger telling me that escort officers or escort sergeants would be coming down, and that he was still downtown or at the hospital. I had been notified, and appropriate people in administration had been notified, and he just requested that the scene just remained secure. So, in answer to your question, we, my guys and I just remained there for scene security to ensure that no vehicle or pedestrian traffic entered the crime scene and contaminated our scene.
You made sure no one came in to that roped off area.
Yes.
Did you take any steps with respect to the business cup foods?
Yes.
What did you do?
Sergeant Kluger asked me if I was able to make contact with the manager, and if so, speak with him, which I did.
How many officers at any given time were used to secure this scene?
I believe that night I only had about maybe 8 to 10 officers on. And I didn't have every single one of my officers on this scene. So there were still a lot of 911 calls that needed to be attended to.
In addition to securing the perimeter of the scene, did you secure any vehicles within the scene?
Yes, sir.
And what vehicles did you secure?
Officers King and Lane squad, as well as Mr. Floyd's vehicle that was parked ahead of theirs.
And could you describe that vehicle, please?
I honestly don't remember what kind of vehicle Mr. Floyd was driving.
Okay.
It was a dark colored vehicle, though, if I remember correctly.
Did you keep officers King and Lane out of the squad 320?
Yes, I did. And I told them to leave their belongings inside the squad car.
At this time, I'd like to publish Exhibit 84. So Exhibit 84, then, for the record, is a photo from your body-worn camera taken at 21:50 and 17 seconds. Is that right?
Yes,
And we see both King and Lane in the photo, correct?
yes,
All right. And is this where you had the initial interaction with them, where you asked them to get out of the vehicle so you could secure it,
that is.
and they complied with it?
They did.
Did you see anyone, including them, take anything out of the vehicle?
No,
Was the vehicle running, or had it been stopped?
it was running.
What did you do since it was running?
I told them to get out of the car. They got out of the car.
And did you, at any point, stop the vehicle from running?
That wasn't until the BCA showed up, and I believe it was Special Agent Mike Phil told me that they were going to take custody of the squad and Mr. Floyd's vehicle. We noticed the vehicle, or we noticed the squad car, I'm sorry, was still running, so he instructed me to power it down.
You'd also mentioned something about a canvass. Did you at some point instruct officers to do a canvass of the area for possible witnesses?
Yes, I explained that, yes.
And what, since you didn't know much about what had happened, what were you asking the officers to look for?
You know, anybody that may have been in the area at the time that the incident occurred. We knew that the incident occurred before we got to work, so, I guess we were just trying to get lucky. Maybe there was somebody still there that was willing to talk to us, or yeah.
Who did you send out to do the canvass? Was it?
Several officers.
Did that include Areola and Nerling?
Yes, it did.
They locate any witnesses who are willing to speak with you?
What was that?
Did they locate any witnesses who are willing to speak with you?
Who were willing to speak with me?
Yes.
No.
Did you at any point interact with an elderly or an older gentleman, I won't say elderly, older gentleman at the scene?
Yes.
Did he identify himself to you, first or last name?
He identified himself to me as Charles. He refused to give me his name, his full name.
Published Exhibit 87. This is another body-worn camera image, not from your body-worn camera, but it shows, who is this?
That's me.
Okay. And is this Charles?
Yes, sir.
And this point captures the conversation that you had with him at 22:05 and about 43 seconds. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
He did not provide any information to you.
No, he did not. I explained to him that he'd be very valuable to us if he had something to say or if he saw something, but he told me he refused to say anything and wondered if he was under arrest, and I told him no, and he told me he wanted to leave.
And of course, you didn't know whether or not he had spoken with anybody already about this incident.
Correct. That was the first time I'd seen him.
Did you ask King and Lane to participate in the canvass?
No, I don't believe I did. No.
What did you ask them to do?
I asked them to chill out because later on I knew from Sergeant Pluger that he had a couple of escort sergeants coming down to transport them to interview room 100.
Publish Exhibit 85. looking at Exhibit 85 from your body-worn camera at 21:51:25. You see officers Lane and King. Were they standing where you told them to stand, waiting where you told them to wait?
Correct.
And at this time, you instructed them to keep their body-worn cameras activated. Is that right?
Correct.
Do you recall speaking with any other potential witnesses while you were at the scene?
No, I don't.
Do you recall entering Cup Foods?
Yes. Yes.
Speak with anybody at Cup Foods?
Yes. Like I said before, Sergeant Pluger asked me to see if I could make contact with the manager there at Cup Foods, and I did, and I spoke with him.
Publish Exhibit 86. All right, this is an image from your body-worn camera at 21:54:32. Who is that individual?
I do not remember his name, but he is the manager there at Cup Foods.
And did you learn whether or not he was a witness to the interaction between the police and George Floyd?
He said he didn't witness anything. I had a brief conversation with him.
Now, when you arrived, you testified that you had taken control of the scene, right? As the sergeant, you were the ranking officer there.
Yes, sir.
At some point, did another ranking officer arrive at the scene?
Yes. Lieutenant Zimmerman from Homicide arrived at the scene shortly after, as well as Sergeant Dale.
Publish Exhibit 88. All right. I know that that's a little hard to see, but can you identify the people in this photo?
That's myself, and that's Lieutenant Zimmerman.
Okay. When did he arrive approximately? If you could take the cutout out.
When did he arrive approximately?
Yes.
I couldn't tell you the time he arrived. I can tell you the timestamp that I'm seeing right there.
Yep.
22:06.
All right.
So that would be 10:06 p.m.
So even if not exact arrival time, this is pretty close in time to Lieutenant Zimmerman's first arrival?
Yes.
All right. When Lieutenant Zimmerman arrived, what happened with the scene?
He came and just ensured that we had the scene secure. He came and ensured that we had officers that were canvassing the area for any potential witnesses that were still there. Yeah.
Did you see Lieutenant Zimmerman interact with either the involved officers, Lane or King?
I don't recall seeing him interact with Lane or King.
Did you
Might have.
impart to Lieutenant Zimmerman any information that you had gathered about the scene or potential witnesses to that point?
Can you ask that question again?
Sure. Did you tell Lieutenant Zimmerman what you did up to that point to get him kind of caught up on the scene and the witnesses and what steps had been taken?
Oh, yes.
All right. Did he direct you to take any further steps now he's a lieutenant, so I suppose?
More canvassing of the area, and also he wanted more officers there at the scene.
Did he confirm that the scene itself was secured
Yes.
and that the squad was secured at 320
Yes.
and that Mr. Floyd's vehicle was secured?
Yes.
You said there was another officer there, a Sergeant Bob Dale. What is Bob Dale assigned to?
He was there. He came with Lieutenant Zimmerman.
Bob Dale's from Homicide, is that right?
I believe so.
And then with this being a critical incident, this was going to be handed over to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, correct?
Well, at that point, we still didn't know if this was indeed a critical incident, but I was going under the assumption that it was, it's better safe to go that way than not.
And because of that, there were some steps taken to ensure that when this was handed off, it would be handed off in a manner that it could be taken over with smoothly, correct?
Yes.
So it was, did either Dale or Zimmerman make a suggestion to you about having a crime scene log?
Yes.
All right. What did they ask for?
They just asked if a crime scene log had been started, and I tasked Officer Areola with that task. Crime scene log is just a log of names of officers and personnel that entered the crime scene.
And did you see Officer Areola start compiling a crime scene log?
Yes.
Published Exhibit 89. You can see this Officer Areola here,
Yes.
and he appears to be holding something. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that the crime scene log?
I believe so.
So as you testified, at some point you learned that Mr. Floyd had died, correct?
Yes.
And do you recall how you received that information?
It was later on in the night, Sergeant Dale actually informed me that Mr. Floyd had passed away.
Was that pretty shortly after Dale and Zimmerman had arrived?
Yeah. Yes.
About 10:13 p.m., is that right?
It was sometime after Sergeant Dale and Lieutenant Zimmerman arrived.
And after that point, were there arrangements made for transport officers to bring Lane and King to City Hall pursuant to critical incident protocol?
There were.
Did you watch that happen?
Yes. Officers Walitsky and Officer Ashoff responded to the scene, and they were Officer King and Officer Lane's transport sergeants.
Published Exhibit 90. There's additional body-worn camera footage. Do you see Officer or Sergeant Ashoff in this photo?
Yes.
Would you take your stylus and draw a circle? And Waletsky?
I don't see Walitsky in this photo.
Was this so according to the timestamp, 22/18/14? Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And that was around the time that the transport officers arrived, and I'm assuming the transport would have happened fairly shortly after that.
Correct.
And they transported Lane and King to, what is it, room 100 within City Hall?
Room 100.
And was it about, shortly after that, about 15 minutes or so later, that the BCA took over the scene?
Yes, I was notified by Lieutenant Zimmerman that the BCA is on their way and they'll be taking over the scene. So we were requested, me and my guys were requested to just stay put for scene security.
Do you recall when the BCA arrived?
I don't remember what time they arrived, no.
Show you Exhibit 91. Do you remember the name of the agent who was involved?
Yes, I believe his name was Special Agent Michael Phil.
Can you tell the jury what you see here in Exhibit 91? Who are those people?
That appears to be Special Agent Michael Phil standing alongside Lieutenant Zimmerman.
Okay. Right here.
Yes.
And that's at 2300. Is that right?
Correct.
That's the approximate time then that the BCA took over the scene?
Approximately.
You saw Special Agent Phil have a conversation with Lieutenant Zimmerman. After that conversation took place, did you have a conversation with Lieutenant Zimmerman?
I believe I had a conversation with both of them afterwards.
Okay.
Brief interaction.
When did Lieutenant Zimmerman remain at the scene after the BCA took over, or did he leave?
Well, he came up to me and just told me pretty much that it's in the BCA's hands now, and they'll be here, and just to ensure that myself and my officers remained on scene for scene security until the BCA tells us they're done with their job, and that we can take down the crime scene tape and leave.
Publish Exhibit 92. And is this Special Agent Phil?
Yes, that is.
During the period of time you were speaking with him and getting instruction on what to do with the scene?
Yes.
Did he ask you to do anything with Squad 320?
Yes.
What did
he
he
told
ask you?
me that they were taking custody of both the squad and Mr. Floyd's vehicle, and we noticed that the squad was still running. He asked me to open it up and power it down, which I did.
Did you remove anything from the vehicle?
No, sir.
Now, at this point, the BCA has the scene, and you're no longer taking any investigative steps or collecting evidence. Is that right?
Correct.
But did you make observations of other officers doing those things, watching the BCA,
Such as?
such as anything with the vehicle?
No. No.
Did
I
you
didn't see anybody doing anything with the vehicles. Any other officer, if that's what you're asking.
Did you see other officers taking photographs, looking at the vehicle?
No, sir.
Did you see any forensic scientists or people you recognize to be forensic scientists come onto the scene?
Just the team of people that Special Agent Michael Phil had with him.
And those
There
were
were
the
several BCA people there.
those were the folks who were allowed in the scene. Is that right?
Yes.
At some point, did you watch Mr. Floyd's vehicle be actually towed away by the BCA?
Yes. Ultimately, Special Agent here had both the squad car as well as Mr. Floyd's vehicle towed from the scene.
And you watched them do that?
Yes, I was still on scene then.
Publish Exhibit 94. Right, is this an image of the BCA towing away Squad 320?
Yes.
And they had already towed the SUV at this point, is that right?
I believe so.
Can you tell the jury then what you did with the scene after the vehicles were towed away?
After the BCA had the vehicles towed away, it wasn't very long after that Special Agent Michael Phil told me that they were all finished now and we could take down the crime scene tape and leave.
Did you do so?
Yes, sir.
Publish Exhibit 95. This is at 3:34 and 54 seconds. What is this? What does this image show?
That's at 3:34 a.m. and that's me. Those are my hands helping take down the crime scene tape.
And so at this point, then the crime scene was clear, no longer needed to be secured, and you would be able to exit the area. Is that right?
Correct.
All right. Thank you very much. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
You may. Thank you. Thank you, Sergeant. You may step down.
Thank you.
All right. And next witness.
Your Honor, the state would call Lieutenant Zimmerman to the stand.
You swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth and nothing but the truth.
I do. Thank you.
Okay. Lieutenant, if you could give us your full name, spelling each of your names to start off with.
I'm sorry.
Your full name, spelling each of your names.
Okay.
And also, if you could remove your mask.
Okay, thank you. It's Richard Zimmerman, Richard, and then Zimmerman, Zimmerman.
Mr. Friend.
Thank you. Can you please tell the jurors what you do for a living?
I'm a police officer with Minneapolis Police Department.
How long have you been a police officer?
Since June 3rd of 1981.
And all that with Minneapolis?
No, the first 4 years, from 81 to 85, I worked for the Fillmore County Sheriff's Department in southeast Minnesota.
What did you do there?
I was a patrol deputy responding to 911 calls.
And so then it was, 1985 that you started with Minneapolis?
Yes, I had the weekend off and started in Minneapolis in June 5th of 1985.
And are you a licensed peace officer in the state of Minnesota?
Yes, I am.
When did you first obtain your license?
I'm sorry?
When did you first obtain your license?
June 3rd of 1981.
And as a police officer, having that license, are you required to do certain things to maintain that license?
Yes.
What kinds of things do you have to do?
We have to do continuing ed, like any other professional license. And we have to do 40 hours of different education, professional education, in a certain time period. I'm not sure if it's 1 or 2 years.
And if you don't, somebody's going to let you know, right?
Yes, they will.
And so, since 1981, have you done all that's been required to maintain your license?
Yes, I have.
When you started with the Minneapolis Police Department in 1985, what was your job? What were your duties?
I was a patrolman. I worked the North Side Precinct. It's called Precinct 4. And I worked the 3rd Precinct. It's called Precinct 3, of course. And then my permanent assignment was the 5th Precinct, which is like Franklin, Nicollet, Hennepin Avenue, Lake Street.
So when you're working as a patrol officer, what kind of things do you do?
Yeah, well, we respond to 911 calls. We, deter crime, or try to deter crime, I should say. Yeah, that's kind of what we do. Traffic control, that kind of thing.
You're out on the streets every day,
Yes.
or at least every day you work, right?
Yes.
And so then, did your job duties change eventually?
Yes, in 1990, crack became really prevalent in the late 80s, and so I joined the crack team in the 5th Precinct, where there were 4 officers and a sergeant, and we would do search warrants, looking for drugs, that kind of thing.
And so what year was that? I'm sorry.
Pardon me?
What year was that?
1990 to 1993.
And what did you do then in 1993?
I took the sergeant's exam and passed it, and was assigned to the adult sex crimes unit.
And so, what does it mean to be promoted to sergeant?
Well, you take a series of tests, and once you're promoted, you express your interest as patrol or investigations. And so I talked to the lieutenant in charge of the sex crimes unit and expressed my interest.
So you mentioned having to take an exam,
Yes.
just like sitting down and, like we do in school, taking an exam.
Yeah, it was a written exam, and once you pass that phase, then you would take an oral exam, and then you were given your scores.
And so you became a sergeant. Did some supervisory responsibilities come with that?
Yes.
Can you just describe for the jurors, like, what kinds of responsibilities a sergeant takes on?
Yeah, well, as a investigative sergeant, you're assigned a case to follow up with the victims, and you do search warrants. And when you're doing search warrants, you have officers that assist you. So you'll assign them duties that, such as, assisting with the search warrant.
And also have responsibilities to make sure the officers underneath you are properly trained?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And, when I would do search warrants, I would explain to the officers that we don't want anyone to get hurt, either the officers or the subjects.
And so, just continuing with your history, then you went into the sex crimes unit as a sergeant, and subsequent to that, did your responsibilities change?
Yes.
Can you tell the jurors about that?
Yeah, in 1995, the homicide unit was expanding because of the amount of murders that were occurring in Minneapolis in 1995. So they brought in myself and one other guy from the robbery unit, and we were assigned partners in the homicide unit.
And which unit do you currently work in?
1995.
No, which unit do you currently work in?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. The homicide unit.
So from 1995 to today, you've been in the homicide unit?
Yes.
And did you, at some time during that period, receive another promotion?
Yes.
Tell the jurors about that, please.
Yeah, in 2007, I took a lieutenant's exam, or 2006. I took the lieutenant's exam, and that's a series of, again, written tests and oral. If you pass that phase, then you go on to the oral interview phase, and you're notified of your results.
And so you were promoted to lieutenant?
Yes, I was.
So how did that change your responsibilities, your job duties?
Well, usually when you're promoted, you're assigned to a different unit than you worked. But they asked me to stay in the homicide unit because of my experience. And so I took over the job in 2008, November of 2008. And the duties are, I get called for every death, suspicious death, deaths where, it's clearly a homicide, deaths where officers have any question about how a person may have died. I go out to the scenes.
And do you also supervise other officers?
Yes, I do.
Can you just describe for the jury, your responsibilities in supervising other officers?
Yes, we have, right now we have 12 detectives in homicide that make up 6 teams. They work with a partner in homicide, and they're on a rotation basis for being on call. They're on call Monday through Monday, and when a team is on call, I'll go out to a scene, assess, what the death may be involved, and I'll call the on-call team to come in and start working the case.
So you still respond to scenes?
Yes.
but you also supervise the work of the investigators.
Yes. I every morning when I come in, I'll pull up, it's called pulling up the cases, and we pull up every death report in Minneapolis, and I'll look through each report, and I'll assign a case that I might have some questions about, and I'll talk to the detectives, explain why I think this needs to be looked into, and that's Monday through Friday kind of thing.
And so are you their direct supervisor then?
Yes.
So you started with Minneapolis Police Department in 1985.
Yes.
Do you know where you are in terms of seniority in the Minneapolis Police Department?
Yes.
Where is that?
I'm the #1 officer in seniority. I hate to say that, but I am.
Understood. Were you called out to a scene on May 25th of 2020?
Yes.
And do you recall, why you were called to that scene?
Yeah, homicide responds, or I respond initially to critical incidents. And a critical incident can be anything from a death to a serious injury of either officers or the public. And so I was called in on this one.
So were you technically on duty at that time?
I was at home, and I was notified by my commander of this incident that happened at 38th in Chicago.
And so then did you respond to that scene?
Yes.
And do you recall about what time it was that you arrived at the scene?
It was a little bit after 9 p.m.
And the location of 38th in Chicago, were you familiar with that location at that time?
Yes.
Fair to say no stranger to calls of violent incidents at that intersection?
Yes, absolutely.
And when you arrived, can you just describe for the jury what you first saw when you arrived at that location?
I arrived on 38th Street, and I parked on the southwest corner on 38th Street. I saw yellow tape up, we call it's crime scene tape, around the intersection. I saw Sergeant Edwards, who I know from work, on his cell phone. And I saw two officers, and he was like in the middle of the scene, kind of. And then I saw two officers standing on the southwest or the southeast corner of the intersection.
And did you then approach those two officers?
Yes, Sergeant Edwards appeared to be busy on the phone, so I just walked up to the two officers.
And I'm going to show you, we had an opportunity before court to show you a piece of body cam footage, shows you approaching the scene, correct?
Yes.
And that appeared to be a true and accurate representation of your approach to those two officers.
Yes, it is.
And that reflects the time as well.
Yes.
Your Honor, I would offer Exhibit 96.
Any objection?
No objection.
96 is received.
And then we'll publish 96. I'm going to pause here just for a moment if I could. This is the intersection of 38th and Chicago,
Yes.
and it looks like the time reflected here is 21:56.
Yes.
So for those of us who have difficulty with that kind of math even, what is the real time that we recall?
Yeah. It's 4 minutes to 10.
Okay. So it was a little closer to 10 when you arrived?
Yes.
All right. And there is an individual, I know it's dark and it's kind of hard to see, but do you know who the individual is in the crosswalk there?
I don't know.
Okay. And all right, let's continue. I'm going to stop right here, if you could, please. And just for the record, at 21:56:53, you see across the intersection there appears to be a person walking towards us.
Yes.
And do you know who that is?
That would be me.
All right. And we'll continue, please.
I'll give these call back for you.
How you doing, Lieutenant?
What's going on?
All right, you can take that down. So it appears that you came to the scene in street clothes, right?
Yes.
All right. And that's the moment where you walked up and talked to the two officers?
Yes, I did.
Did you recognize those two officers?
Yeah. No, I didn't.
And you appeared to be on the phone. Do you recall who you were talking to?
I don't know if it was my commander or a deputy chief. I'm not sure.
So then when you arrived there, those two officers looked like you had just asked them a question. Did they give you some information about the incident?
Yes.
And based on that information, what did you conclude about their role in the incident?
There's a thing that we call involved officers and non-involved officers. And based on what they had told me, I determined they were involved officers.
And why would it be important to distinguish between involved and non-involved officers?
Well, if you're an involved officer, you need to be brought down to room 100 at City Hall, and you need to be brought down by a supervisor in separate cars.
And that's just according to policy?
Yes.
And so after having that conversation with them, what did you do next?
I talked to the sergeant, I believe, Sergeant Edwards, and told him that we needed some more people out here. He told me another sergeant was on his way, and I told him that we needed to get these two guys downtown.
And which sergeant, you remember, I'm sorry, which sergeant that was?
I'm sorry?
Which sergeant that was you talked to?
I don't remember.
Okay. Was it Sergeant Edwards?
I believe that's who I first talked to.
Okay. And so showing you Exhibit 90, if we could please. And this is a photograph for the record of 2218. This is you speaking on the phone at that time, correct?
Yes.
All right. And so here you're still dealing with things at the scene, is that right?
Yes.
All right. And so we can take that down, I guess, thanks. The sergeant that you talked to, what kinds of things did you ask that sergeant to take care of?
I asked the patrol sergeant to arrange to have the two involved officers brought down to room 100, and that we needed some more officers at the scene.
And why did you think you needed more officers at the scene?
To search for any possible witnesses or video.
And so then, after having that conversation, what did you do next?
I had called in two of the sergeants from homicide, the on-call team, to assist me.
And as you were doing that, did you undertake any other actions to try and identify things that might be helpful for the investigation?
Yes.
Like what?
If you stand in the center of the intersection and you'd look for, first of all, you look for video cameras that may be hanging from different buildings, or in this case, milestone cameras.
What is a milestone camera?
It's a city camera that's set up in different areas of the city, and they can be monitored to help us deter crime or to help if a crime occurs.
And being familiar with that location, did you believe there was a milestone camera at that intersection?
I knew there was, yes.
Okay. I'm going to show you Exhibit 1. You recognize what's in that photograph?
Yes.
And what is that?
That's the intersection of 38th and Chicago.
Do you know, can you show the jurors, if you want, you can write on the screen, there should be a little stylus there in front of you, where that camera is located?
I believe it was right here.
Okay. And how is it mounted, or where is it mounted?
I'm not sure if it's on a light pole or under a light pole, but it's mounted up high.
Some kind of pole there.
Right.
Okay. In fact, sometimes we call them pole cameras for
Yeah.
the obvious reason.
Yes, the older guys do that.
Older guys and me, is what you mean. When you were at the scene, did you learn more about the condition of Mr. Floyd, the subject?
I did.
Do you recall when, in your time there, you learned about that?
It was after Sergeant Dale arrived.
And so, Sergeant Dale, one of the sergeants you called in to assist?
Yes, Sergeant Bob Dale is one of the homicide teams that I called in.
And so this was after you had arranged the transport officers.
Yes.
And what did you learn about his condition?
That Mr. Floyd had died.
And were some decisions made about what would become of this investigation based on information? Yes. And what was decided?
That the BCA would be in charge of the investigation, the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension.
And when that decision is made, what's the role of Minneapolis police at that scene?
Well, first it's to support the BCA investigative team with whatever they might need that night. And also it's to secure any witnesses that we may find to see if they would be willing to talk to the BCA. Also, it's when you're at a scene, trying to locate any video cameras again and filling in the BCA agents that arrive.
And in fact, at some point, did BCA agents arrive?
Yes.
And when they arrive, just describe a little bit for the jury what the process is and upon their arrival.
Yeah, the BCA agent generally or specifically in this case?
Just generally.
Yeah. When the BCA arrives, they'll come up to you for a briefing, and you tell them what you have at the scene, what you've learned, and where people are at. Like in this case, the officers were brought to room 100, that kind of thing. And then you tell them, or you ask them what help they might need.
And then specifically, did something like that happen here in this case?
Yes.
All right. And I'm going to show you Exhibit 91 on the screen, please. And do you recognize what's depicted in this photograph?
Yes.
And again, this is the intersection of 38th and Chicago?
Yeah, that would be me in the center of the shot, talking with a BCA agent.
And this is starting that process of turning the scene over to them?
Right, yeah.
So the time here shows 2300, about 11 p.m.?
Yes.
And so then did you in fact turn this scene over to the BCA?
Yes, I did.
And that's shortly thereafter concluded your involvement with the scene?
Yes.
You talked earlier about the training you need to do to maintain your peace officer's license, correct?
Yes.
And as a Minneapolis police officer, where do you get that training from?
Well, we'll get it from our training unit. We'll also get it from outside sources. different schools that are being put on. Some that are specific to homicide, some that are, a one-day course, some may be a 2-week course, that kind of thing.
Does that training include instruction on the use of force?
Yes.
And how often do you get instruction on the use of force?
Once a year.
And how many officers have to go through that use of force training every year?
Every officer on the police department.
That includes the guy who's number one in seniority?
It includes me, yes, absolutely.
And when you, let me ask it this way. Are there also Minneapolis Police Department policies about the use of force?
Yes, there is.
And are you required to be familiar with those policies?
Yes, you are.
And when you do that use of force training, does it cover the policies as well?
Yes.
Do you also do some physical activity, taking people down and rolling around?
Yes, we have a mat that we use at our SOC center, and it's like a huge wrestling mat.
And are you familiar with the use of force continuum?
Yes.
Is that part of the Minneapolis Police Department use of force policy?
Yes, it is.
Can you just describe in general what that means to the jurors?
Yeah, so basically the use of force continuum is guidelines, or it's policy actually, that we have to follow. And it's when, for instance, when you arrive at a scene, no matter what the scene, the first level, the lowest level, would be just your presence at a scene in uniform. The next step up may be your verbal skills that you've learned to help diffuse a situation or learn information about whatever the situation is. The next step would be like a soft technique, escorting the person by their arm, that type of thing. The next level would be a hard technique. That's where you would use your, you maybe have to use your mace or handcuffs, that kind of thing. And finally, the top level on the continuum is deadly force.
And so those levels change, how, under what, or for what reasons might that change?
Yeah, well, if you're, say you arrive at a scene and somebody's pointing a gun at you or shooting at you, of course you go to the top level, and that's how they may change.
So it's relative to the threat.
Right, yes.
And are there different kinds of force that officers can use?
Yes.
And have you ever, in all the years you've been working for the Minneapolis Police Department, been trained to kneel on the neck of someone who is handcuffed behind their back in a prone position?
No, I haven't.
Is that, if that were done, would that be considered force?
Absolutely.
What level of force might that be?
That would be the top tier, the deadly force.
Why?
Because of the fact that if your knee is on a person's neck, that can kill them.
And in your training with the Minneapolis Police Department over the years, have you received training on restraining people?
Yes.
Including the use of handcuffs?
Yes.
And when you are handcuffing somebody, when you handcuff them, what is your responsibility as an officer with regard to that person?
Well, could I give you an example?
3 trains.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this again. If you, as an officer, according to the training, you handcuff somebody behind the back, what's your responsibility with regard to that person from that moment on?
That person is yours. He's your responsibility. His safety is your responsibility. His well-being and is your responsibility.
Once you handcuff somebody, does that affect the amount of force that you should consider using?
Absolutely.
How so?
Once a person is cuffed, the threat level goes down all the way, you know, to they're cuffed. How can they really hurt you, you know?
Well, certainly there could be circumstances when a cuffed person could still be combative.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, yeah. But you getting injured is way down.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, if you're, you could have some guy try to kick you or something, but you can move out of the way. That person is handcuffed, you know, and they, the threat level is just not there.
So by handcuffing somebody, you've taken away some of their ability to harm you.
Absolutely.
And if somebody who is handcuffed becomes less combative, does that change the amount of force that an officer is to use under policy?
Yes.
How so?
Well, if they become less combative, you may just have them sit down on a curb, or the idea is to calm the person down, and if they are not a threat to you at that point, you try to, you know, to help them so that they're not as upset as they may have been in the beginning.
In your 30 years of training with the Minneapolis Police Department, in your experience, have you been trained on the prone position?
Yes.
And what has your training been specific to the prone position?
Well, once you secure or handcuff a person, you need to get them out of the prone position as soon as possible because it restricts their breathing.
When you handcuff somebody behind their back, well, as part of training, have you been handcuffed behind the back?
Yes.
And have you been trained on what happens to individuals when they're handcuffed behind the back?
Yes.
So when somebody is handcuffed behind their back, how does it affect them physically?
It stretches the muscles back through your chest, and it makes it more difficult to breathe.
If you put somebody in the prone position, well, is it well known, this danger of putting somebody in the prone position?
Sustained.
How long have you had training on the dangers of the prone position as part of a Minneapolis police officer?
Since 1985.
And is it part of your training regularly to learn about keeping somebody in the prone position?
Yes.
And what has the training been with regard to the prone position?
Once a person is cuffed, you need to turn them on their side or have them sit up. You need to get them off their chest.
Why?
Because of the, as I mentioned earlier, your muscles are pulling back when you're handcuffed. And if you're laying on your chest, that's constricting your breathing even more.
In your training as a Minneapolis police officer, are you provided with training on medical intervention?
Yes.
I assume you're not, taught to be paramedics, but you receive some level of training.
Yeah, we're first responders, I think, is what our category would be.
Does that include doing what we think of as CPR, chest compressions?
Yes.
And how often is that part of your training?
CPR, it's like every other year or so.
And as part of your training within the Minneapolis Police Department policies, is there an obligation to provide medical intervention when necessary?
Absolutely.
What is the general teaching that you get with regard to medical intervention?
Well, again, it's been that you need to provide medical care for a person that is in distress.
And would that be true even if you've called an ambulance to come to the scene?
Yeah, absolutely. The ambulance will get there in whatever amount of time, and in that time period, you need to provide medical assistance before they arrive.
Why don't we take our mid-morning break? Members of the jury will take our 20-minute mid-morning break. The attorneys and I will deal with the issue while you're off break. And Lieutenant, you may step down if you wish.